Hello, folks. Thank you for getting your coffee and coming back so speedily. What I've noticed in coffee hour is that we eat a lot of cookies and we drink a lot of coffee and we stay a long time to talk. I would like to say that most of the talking will happen after, and I hope we won't be too long. But we're going to get started. We're going to start with a video. It's not a long video, it's 8 minutes, but it's a great video because it's in a Q&A format, so it'll set up the process and we'll give you lots of really good information. So away we go, I think.
Cross fingers.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for Roger and Malone.
Oh, yes.
They were there. Okay. Oh, I didn't see his head. There we go.
Does the Indigenous Church really want to separate from the United Church?
The sense that I get is that it isn't about separation, but creating the conditions for the Indigenous Church to be in partnership with the United Church of Canada in a good way and in the way that we ought to have been in partnership with one another from the beginning.
This means a change in structure for us as the United Church, and they're asking, really, I understand, to be partners with us, to row down in a canoe the same direction, but in different canoes, supporting each other as we paddle.
The themes that I think about are those of partnership, of mutual support, and those are the themes that I hear articulated in the words from the National Indigenous Council in its proposal to General Council 44. It's time for us to move towards a different relationship. It's time to set aside the notion of missions to Indigenous peoples, truly move towards being partners in God's call to all the earth.
What does the proposed structure look like?
Certaines personnes se demandent à quoi ressemblerait ou ressemblera la future structure. Il faut dire 2 ou 3 choses. Premièrement, il n'y a pas de structure définie pour le moment. Et quand ce remit, quand ce renvoi passera, parce que j'espère qu'il passera, alors on commencera à voir comment s'organiser.
There's no new proposed structure figured out yet. If the remit passes, the Indigenous Church will begin their work. It's very similar to what happened to us as the non-Indigenous Church when we moved from a 4-court structure to a 3-court structure. We knew we were going to have regional councils. We weren't really sure what each of those regional councils would look like, and we figured it out as we moved along the way.
Similarly, the structure of the autonomous national indigenous organization will be worked out over time. The Indigenous Church does not yet have all the answers for what the structure will look like, but they want the time and space to do this work on their own, while being in relationship with the rest of the Church.
Donc, oui, on ne sait pas exactement à quoi la future structure ressemblera, mais nous sommes confiants qu'avec le temps et en dialoguant ensemble, nous arriverons à quelque chose.
What are the financial implications if the remit passes?
An Indigenous church has existed and been funded as a part of the United Church of Canada for many years. This has included funding for staff at former conferences like the All Native Circle Conference and BC Native Ministries, as well as to local communities of faith, and funding for the Indigenous Ministries and Justice Unit at the General Council Office. So as the Indigenous Church continues to be a part of the United Church of Canada This funding will continue.
Pour ce qui est de la question relative aux contributions locales, qu'on appelle en anglais assessment, il faut dire que les communautés autochtones, jusqu'à présent, n'ont historiquement pas été des gens qui contribuaient, tout simplement parce qu'elles manquaient de ressources au niveau local. Maintenant, dans la conversation et dans le dialogue, ensemble, il nous sera possible de revoir les choses et de voir quelle attitude nouvelle prendre concernant ces contributions locales.
Will the Indigenous Church still accept United Church policy?
Policy outlined in the manual apply to all bodies of the United Church, that including the Indigenous Church, in areas of social policy, and hope is that moving forward, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous Church will work together to co-develop policy positions.
Will the Indigenous Church practice United Church theology?
The United Church of Canada has a broad theological spectrum. Not all people in the United Church share the same theological positions. However, we do share a commitment to Scripture as foundational and to our doctrine and theologies as expressed in our Statement of Faith. For example, the 20 Articles of Doctrine from 1925, and a Statement of Faith from 1940, and a New Creed from 1968, and a Song of Faith from 2006. This includes the Indigenous Church, and the remit does not change that. The caretakers of our Indigenous Circle, in their foundational document, Calls to the Church, say that Indigenous people will continue to practice their own spirituality alongside the teaching of Jesus. Respecting Indigenous spirituality is a part of healing of reconciliation for the Church.
Are we forcing something on the Indigenous Church that they are not capable of handling?
I would like to be really cautious and really critical of any narrative that includes doubting the capacities of Indigenous peoples. Historically, those narratives have been used to infantilize and to delegitimize the agency of Indigenous peoples, nations, and governance structures, and used to justify the colonial project. And they're discourses that have become prevalent and embedded in our society and in our patterns of thought around Indigenous people. I feel like those are racist assumptions that need to be refuted, that are dangerous, and have had a violent impact over the course of our history. In this case, it is also the case that we're not forcing anything on the Indigenous Church. This is a request that has come explicitly, intentionally, thoughtfully, and with discernment from the Indigenous Church itself.
And this change is the expressed wish of the Indigenous Church. The background on this is that in 2015, when the Church made the decision to move from a 4-court to a 3-court model, the Indigenous Church made clear that it had not been fully included in the processes that led to this change. And so they called for more time to determine their vision for the future, which they did in a document called the Calls to the Church, which was accepted in 2018. And so the remit is a direct product of the structures and processes articulated in that prophetic document that the Indigenous Church wrote.
I think we should be receiving this proposal and this remit with celebration and enthusiasm, and recognize it as the movement of the Spirit within community.
Once again, I'd like to introduce you to Reverend Melody Duncanson-Hales. Melody is a staff person from the Canadian Shield Regional Council, of which we are a member. I just want to remind you that the reason why you've been getting information and why you're here is that it is not the congregations that vote, it is council that votes. But council represents you, and so we need to hear from you. So after Melody, we're going to have a Q&A, but you don't have to just do questions. If you have comments that you want to make about how you feel about this, that can be looked at as well. So I'll have a mic when Melody is finished. All right, Melody.
Much, Donna. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm a friend of St. Andrews. I show up here, I wander through every once in a while, and you've all met my kids as well. You've raised up my kids, just as we heard from Connor this morning. You've had your thumbprint on my kids' soul, so I'm so grateful to be a friend of St. Andrews. I work at the Canadian Shield Regional Council office, and one of the roles I serve in is in supporting the work of the Right Relations Resource Team. You actually have a member here among you, and that's Sylvia Karskadin, who's very gifted in this work. We work in community. I'd also like to mention in the video you saw there was reference to General Council 2018. You also have some folks here in the room that were present to that vote. Connor was one of them. I was there. I'm just trying to remember if Dave, where's Dave gone? Dave was there too, yeah, that's what I figured. So there were a number of folks that were present to that reception of the calls to the church, that prophetic document that was referred to, and who accepted it. So today I wanted to begin the conversation by again sharing a resource that was developed locally but actually has been shared nationally throughout the church, and that's with a Minute for Right Relations. You may be familiar with the practice of a Right Relations resource team producing Minutes for Right Relations. This particular minute was written by Reverend Whitney Bruno, who is the minister in Little Current Pastoral Charge, just down the road. And she is also on the Indigenous Justice Council. So she works nationally, locally, and on Manitoulin Island in this ministry. And these are copies that are printed up. I've also recommended the blue form that you have. The blue sheet is the pastoral letter that was sent out just last week by Reverend Dr. Michael Blair, who is our General Secretary of the United Church. So these are the words of Whitney. The idea of a self-determining Indigenous church has a very long history in the United Church of Canada. Before the merger, this was a reality in the Methodist Church, but sadly we did not carry it forward into the United Church. From that time until now, Indigenous peoples have been organizing to bring their vision of church to life, whether that was achieving the Apology in 1986, which happened again just down the road, for the church's role in colonization, building Indigenous systems of governance and theological education, or asserting its long-standing calls to the church to acknowledge and atone for its actions at residential institutions. With the establishment of residential institutions, healthcare facilities, and missions of the 19th and 20th centuries, as is named in the 1986 Apology, the United Church and its predecessors confused Western ways and culture with the depth and breadth and length and height of the gospel of Christ, and imposed Western civilization as a condition for accepting the gospel. The United Church of Canada pledged to uphold the rights to spiritual identity and self-determination in 2016 when it adopted the principles, norms, and standards of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the framework for reconciliation as a response to the calls to truth and to action and truth of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. The church stated at that time that it was not sure of what lies ahead, but that it was committed to a new identity, a new relationship, and a new way of being with the Indigenous church. In 2019, the General Council 43 approved the creation of a national Indigenous organization as a body equivalent to and having the same power and responsibilities as a regional council. This permits congregations that identify as Indigenous to self-organize, hold elections, manage funds, and so on, just like a regional council does. This organization is already reflected in the manual in section C and IO. So why do we need this remit? This remit is actually just finishing the work started in 2019. In our current process, and depending on the type of change that is needed to be made, the Indigenous church would require a new remit for all the continued changes to its developing structure. This means that the Indigenous church would be constantly seeking the approval from the rest of the church to make those structural changes. This kind of dynamic, where the Indigenous church is always seeking and asking for consent from the non-Indigenous church, really continues and reflects colonial thinking and practices. This remit would preemptively approve a regional council-like Indigenous church to change its own internal structure without the need for a wider church to do a remit vote. It would remove barriers, which means permit the Indigenous church to change and adapt, just like regional councils do. This remit does not make a new church, nor does it remove the Indigenous church from essential agreement, nor would it make the Indigenous church separate from executive council or general council. It would be part of the work toward ensuring that we will never again use our power as a church to hurt others with attitudes of racial and spiritual superiority, which is part of the 1988 apology. This is an essential component of our intention to become not just a reconciling, but also an actively anti-racist church. In this situation across the country, when met with this level of remit, not voting counts the same as voting no, which is why it is imperative that every council engage with this material, and why you as a congregation, as a body of Christ, are being invited to consider this invitation into this information as well. Voting yes to this remit is the only way to approve the self-autonomy and authority of the Indigenous church. So, you have those same words in front of you on the orange sheet. I'm grateful to Reverend Whitney Bruno, who brings really fresh eyes to this conversation. She is an admissions minister from the United States and has done a lot of very intensive work on Manitoulin Island to open herself to what is happening in the United Church today. So I'm wondering, what do you wonder about? What are your questions? What are your thoughts? I hope that I can respond, and if I can't, I will get back to you. But maybe you have something to say about this.
And we'll use this mic because that's the only way people at home can hear your questions and comments, is for you to speak into the mic.
Will there be times where they'll be coming to our church ceremonies, or they're going to do theirs here, and we'll be able to participate? Is there going to be some kind of a joining every once in a while?
So tell me more about what you understand it to be.
So I'm just wondering if they are an entity within the United Church, if they're going to be participating at times with us, and then us with them.
Yeah, so these are already United Church of Canada congregations, and they already worship across the country, Sunday mornings, midweek. They already participate in many of the same worship activities that we do here at St. Andrews. When we come together across the country, when we think about this, we join in ceremonies, we join in worship experiences with friends from British Columbia to Newfoundland. And at those times, maybe at general council meetings, when we're gathered together, maybe there's times for kind of national prayer, national learning times. Of course, everybody is included in those times. And there are Indigenous identifying congregations that are to the south of our region in Shining Waters, who are historical places like Christian Island, for example, have historical United Church congregations, also practicing Indigenous spirituality, but are firmly United Church in their theology as well. So, yeah, we come together all the time.
Are they called the Indigenous United Church, and are we the non-Indigenous United Church of Canada?
I don't think that there's been any names put forward yet.
Like in the printout, it's referred to the
Indigenous
and the non-Indigenous a lot.
Yeah, so that's just a way of speaking. What their name will be kind of sorted through, much like who are we as Canadian Shield Regional Council, right? In years past, there was the name of the All Native Circle. There was British Columbia Indigenous Ministries. So they're still working at determining their identifying name. But in terms of our nomenclature and the way we think about it, there is a historic settler church, non-Indigenous and Indigenous church. So that's why in the literature you're reading a non-Indigenous and Indigenous church. Does that make sense?
Right, it makes sense. It just seems that, like the United Church is really not even spoken.
Well, because we're all United Church. This is an internal. We're all United Church together, right? And when we're referring to some of these, we also remember that there are different diaspora communities within the United Church. So, for example, Korean United Churches and United Churches that are connected to Zimbabwe, that are here in Canada as new communities. So, I mean, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous nomenclature speaks to that reality as well. Any thoughts? Any questions? I know Sylvia has thoughts.
I don't have a question really, but I do feel called to just say that as part of the Right Relations team of the region, I would say that we all work very hard to support Right Relations, and that this is part of the work of Right Relations. And so I support it wholeheartedly. Maybe we don't all know how it's all going to work out, but there are lots of things we don't know how they work out. When we had the regions, nobody knew how that would work out either. So I think we have to move forward in faith and confidence that the Holy Spirit is acting and we're doing God's will.
Exactly, Sylvia. Thanks for mentioning that. I think sometimes when we have these conversations, we would like to have everything in black and white. And even here at St. Andrews, right now, you're engaged in a visioning process and a discipling process where you're asking the Spirit, who are we now and what are we becoming? So too, I would hope our whole church would always be engaging with those sorts of questions. So it's okay not to know all the answers right now. At least that's what the Holy Spirit would tell us.
Thank you. So I wholeheartedly agree with what Sylvia said. To me, it's a no-brainer which way we go with a yes. Melody, when is the vote done? I'm sorry if I missed this. I had to step out for a second. When will the vote be done with the church, and how will it be done?
Yeah, so it's already occurred so it has to happen at all the different levels of what we call courts of the church. There are currently 3 courts. There is a national general council, there are the regional councils, and there's the local congregational governance bodies. It has already happened at the general council level. It happened in November for our regional council. We hosted an online meeting for Canadian Shield Regional Council. I'm just thinking, I know for sure, Sylvia, you were there, and Dave was there, and I'm wondering, you were there, Bev, right? I couldn't remember if it was Maureen or Bev was there. And so, and you were there, Donna, as a member of regional council. So our commissioners voted in favor at that time. What I understand here is that February 22nd will be your council vote. This is all really important because there has been 1 full year of engagement for this question. March 31st is the deadline for the National Church to receive the responses from governing bodies. One of the things that isn't mentioned in the video and not even in the, tiny bit referred to in Whitney's letter is something that I am very excited about, which is the ability for the Indigenous church to grant their own testamer. A testamer is a certification for ministry within the United Church of Canada. And what fascinates me is the way that the Indigenous church may be calling. We've heard a lot today about calling ministers, forming ministers, what kind of theological education might be part of that engagement. For me, I think as a lifelong learner, I have a lot to learn from Indigenous perspectives within Christian theology. And so I'm super stoked about what that might mean for the rest of our church. What are we going to be learning by engaging in that kind of really intentional formation for ministry? Other questions? Yeah.
One thing I find sort of positive about this is that it's coming from that group is saying we want that. So
Yep.
I feel like that's a good thing. It's not imposed. But I'd also like to know, like, what, just because I always like both sides of the story. So, like, what are the negative parts? Like, has anything come out that? Like, it doesn't sound like it.
So you heard in the video some of those questions that people are wondering about. And in the early days when I was meeting with congregations, I as well have been a pastoral charge supervisor. I've met with local congregations to kind of wonder through some of these things, and some of the questions were very similar to that. First thing always seemed to be financial implications. Are there? And we had to be clear, no, this already is in the structure that we have now. And again, that concern around, are we talking about a church divided? Now, obviously, we're not. We're talking about ways of being united church together, and for me, it's a voice of hope. I'll speak for myself. I see no downside to this. I see absolutely no downside to this. But I do know that people have different experiences and do have concerns or things they're wondering about, which I hope are addressed in the responses you've heard.
So I think that was one of the big questions. Does this mean that they're going to be separate? Are they going to be outside the United Church of Canada? And I did go to the event at St. Peter's where Michael Blair came and he spoke to everybody. And I sat beside Bill Stedman, who was a friend of ours. And that question was asked, and Bill said, that's what I want to know. I want to know if they're going to be separated. And of course, it's not that way, but that is one of the big questions. It sort of relates a little bit to Jane's question.
Yeah.
You know, is it going to be two separate things? No, I don't think so.
It's not going to be two separate things as much as these are desires from Indigenous identifying churches within the umbrella of the United Church of Canada. Nobody here is saying we're leaving the United Church of Canada, because it's very possible for any congregation, any person to leave the United Church of Canada at any time. We're not a locked-in kind of situation here, right? What I'm saying is it is much more like that relationship that regional councils have within the United Church of Canada. So is it separate? In as much as the Canadian Shield Regional Council is separate from the General Council. So that we all ascribe to those bedrock beliefs, we all fall under those key theological points around the new creed, around the basis of union. We're all in essential agreement, but we have different expressions of that essential agreement based on our context, based on who we are together in community. It's no less the same for people who identify as Indigenous.
So you mentioned that all of the votes need to be in by March the 31st. Let's assume for the moment that this passes. What happens next?
What happens next is that the Indigenous organizations get to go back and start working on their governance, start determining their structures, just like in 2018 and 2019, which as a staffer, we always think about as like the big, it was a big year for us as staff. It was a big year for folks that are volunteering and serving the wider church, because we had to do things like write constitutions. And we had to think about what kind of representation we wanted and how we wanted to live out. So what happens in Canadian Shield in terms of our level of governance, we have 2 commissions. It doesn't look like that in the rest of Canada. And that was the hard work that we had to do. Always revising, always reforming. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I think overall this is a good idea, but my question is, what happens if it doesn't go through?
That's a good question as well. And I'll again, I'm just going to respond myself, personally, Melody. I'm concerned. How could this not pass? Well, it could not pass because of people's, or the church's disengagement with this vote, right? And because, as I mentioned, within the United Church of Canada, there is no, you can't abstain. You have to make a choice. And so if enough congregations do not respond by that deadline, then that is counted by no. And that concerns me. That there's a lot, there will be a lot of soul searching at that point in time, I think, on behalf of the Indigenous organizations within the United Church, on leadership within the United Church. I think there will be a lot of soul searching. I would not, I don't want to go there. The worst case, to me, that feels like worst case scenario. But there is a possibility that that could happen, right?
I like to think that Sudbury has a very special place in the journey with our Indigenous friends, because here in 1986 the apology was made, and it was a dramatic moment, and it was I think it's wonderful that we can kind of claim that this was the place that this happened, and so maybe I feel more attached, but I think it's really really important, and there's a lot that we are going to gain. This is going to enrich our church rather than deplete it in any way.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anyway.
The way I look at this, it's back in the day when we had the expansion of the churches in Sudbury. This is basically the same thing. The Indigenous people are starting their churches, which is all part of the region. Now it's a regional council, not presbytery.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything wrong with it. If the Indigenous people want to get together and makes a bigger body than one here, one there, two there, set up. And I'm all for it as a member of St. Andrew's congregation. So I don't see that there's going to be any problem. There's still an expanded church as part of the whatever shield they're in, and the United Church.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
So a question from the booth. I'm not sure if it's from the those online or from the booth personnel, but is there a waiting system, WEIGHT, a waiting system rated by the national church has already approved this. Let's assume for the moment that the regional councils as a group have approved this, but then, as you said, worst case scenarios, if the congregational vote goes against this, is there a waiting system? How does that work?
You may be shocked to hear there is no waiting system. So the vote at the General Council and the vote at Canadian Shield is exactly the same as the vote at St. Andrew's Council. There are approximately 2,500 United Church congregations, governing bodies across Canada. There are 16 regional bodies, and there is one General Council. Now you understand why it's really important for congregations and congregational leadership to engage with this material. Yeah.
If we wanted to express our opinion to the actual people who are voting, who would that be in our congregation?
So are there members of your council? I think you have your council chair is here, your minister is here.
And I'm one, and Ann Pyle, and Bev Chapman.
And Ralph is your council
and
chair.
Ralph is the chair of our council. Yeah. And what I've put out in the news, I've given the full list of all of the names of people. I've given Bev's email address, my email address, if people prefer to send an email. And then we're encouraging on next Sunday and the Sunday after, and I think there's 2 more Sundays after that before we actually take the vote. Talk to us, let us know what your thoughts are. This is a process that has been really important to council. Ralph puts it on the agenda every single month so that we can talk about it and see what the process is that we're engaging in, because we really don't want to make a decision on our own. We really want to hear from you. So please, we've heard a lot today, but please talk to us. We sincerely mean that. Any other? I guess I should, so you don't have to twist your necks. Anything else? Well, I do want to say thank you again to Melody, to Gloria, to Roger, to Malone, for the help and support by coming to us today, Melody. It's very supportive from Regional Council, and we really do appreciate it. And we appreciate that you're here, that there is an interest from the people of St. Andrews to engage in this. It's really critical. So we thank you for staying. Sorry, I provided coffee and cookies, but not a lot of conversation time, except on this topic. So next Sunday, you'll have to get caught up and stay longer. If there isn't anything else from anyone, I'll say thank you and have a really good week. It's supposed to warm up a little bit.
Thank you.